Welcome to Delta Wave History. Tonight, we step away from the relentless pace of the modern world to examine something slow, purposeful, and profoundly quiet. We will meticulously dismantle the heavy brass housing of an 18th century beacon. Imagine a jagged, unforgiving coastline shrouded in a thick evening fog. Against this chaotic backdrop stands a solitary structure of stone and iron, built to house a singular, unwavering light. The air inside the octagonal glass chamber of the lantern room is still and warm. It smells faintly of polished metal, aged canvas, and the dense waxy aroma of refined whale oil. In the exact center of the room stands the optic apparatus, a towering, intricate hive of gleaming brass and carefully arranged glass. Before we can understand the mathematical elegance of the light, we must first dismantle the protective outer housing. This housing was engineered to withstand the relentless vibrations of coastal storms. We begin by examining the base plate, a massive ring of cast iron that anchors the entire assembly to the masonry. It is secured by 12 evenly spaced, hand-forged bolts. These bolts possess the subtle imperfections characteristic of 18th century metallurgy. Their square heads have been worn smooth by decades of routine maintenance and the slow friction of a canvas cloth. We take a long, heavy iron spanner, its handle wrapped in a tight spiral of leather to improve the grip. The tool feels perfectly balanced and pleasantly cool to the touch. With the glass removed, we have a clear view of the lamp at the absolute center of the focal plane. This is an Argand lamp, a marvel of late 18th century fluid dynamics. We move to the second bolt, applying the exact same steady pressure. The process is repeated, slowly and methodically, until all 12 bolts have been loosened from their iron bed. With the bolts removed, we can now slide away the heavy brass panels that conceal the lower gearworks. The brass is 1/4 of an inch thick, heavy and substantial in the hands. As the panel is lifted away, we expose the primary chassis of the primitive lens. It is an intricate web of brass muntins, resembling the delicate framework of a cathedral window. This framework holds the glass in place, gripping each prism tightly, while allowing for the subtle expansion and contraction caused by the heat of the central lamp. We take a smaller, flat-head screwdriver to loosen the brass retaining clips. The blade of the screwdriver fits snugly into the slotted head of each tiny, hand-machined screw. As the first retaining clip is removed, the sheer weight of the glass prism behind it becomes apparent. It is a heavy, solid wedge of crown glass, clear and dense. This is a primitive Fresnel prism, a step toward the eventual perfection of dioptric lighthouse lenses. It represents a brilliant intersection of artisanal craftsmanship and abstract geometry. To truly appreciate this piece of glass, we must trace its origins. We must imagine the intense, sustained heat of an 18th century glassworks. Deep within a stone furnace, a mixture of pure white silica, sand, potash, and limestone was heated until it melted into a glowing, viscous liquid. The temperature was maintained by a continuous, rhythmic feeding of coal. The molten glass was carefully gathered on the end of a long iron rod and pressed into a heavy cast iron mold. The mold was shaped to form a rough, concentric ring. As the glass cooled, it transitioned from a bright, angry orange to a dull red, and finally to a transparent, icy clarity. But its journey was only just beginning. The cast glass was rough, its surfaces uneven, and its optical properties compromised by microscopic ripples. It had to be painstakingly ground and polished by hand. A master glassworker mounted the heavy ring onto a wooden turntable. The table was turned slowly by an apprentice, maintaining a steady, hypnotic rotation. The master applied a slurry of water and coarse grinding sand to the surface of the glass. He then pressed a curved iron tool against the spinning ring. The sound of the grinding was a constant gritty hiss. It was a sound that filled the workshop for days on end as millimeters of glass were slowly worn away. As the desired angle was approached, the coarse sand was replaced with increasingly finer abrasives. The gritty hiss softened into a smooth, rhythmic hum. Finally, a paste of fine jeweler's rouge and water was used to polish the prism. The glass slowly transformed from a cloudy, frosted white into a perfectly transparent, brilliant lens. We hold the finished prism in our gloved hands. It is heavy, its surface flawlessly smooth. We can trace the sharp, precise angles of its edges. The mathematical principle at work here is refraction. When light enters the dense medium of the glass, its speed changes, causing the ray to bend. The artisan ground the outer face of this prism to a highly specific, calculated curve. This curve ensures that every ray of light striking the glass is bent to run perfectly parallel to the horizon. In older, simpler lighthouses, a simple parabolic mirror was placed behind the flame. But mirrors absorbed too much light and tarnished quickly in the salty coastal air. This primitive Fresnel design utilizes dioptric principles, passing the light through the glass rather than bouncing it off a surface. It captures significantly more of the flame's energy. Surrounding the central bullseye lens are the catadioptric rings. These rings are shaped like triangular wedges, and they operate on the principle of total internal reflection. When a ray of light enters the top of a catadioptric ring, it hits the angled back wall of the glass. Because of the shallow angle, the light does not pass through. Instead, the light bounces off the inner surface of the glass as if it were a perfect, untarnishable mirror. It is then directed straight outward, joining the main beam. We carefully place the heavy prism onto a velvet-lined workbench. We then return to the brass housing to remove the next piece of the optical puzzle. With the glass removed, we have a clear view of the lamp at the absolute center of the focal plane. This is an Argand lamp, a marvel of late 18th century fluid dynamics. The lamp features a hollow, cylindrical wick made of tightly woven cotton. This design allows air to flow not just around the outside of the flame, but up through its center. The double draft of oxygen ensures that the whale oil burns at an incredibly high temperature. The resulting flame is bright, steady, and entirely free of smoke. We run a finger along the brass oil reservoir located slightly above the lamp. Gravity feeds the oil down a narrow copper tube, perfectly matching the rate at which the wick consumes it. A tiny, precisely machined valve regulates this flow. We turn the brass knob of the valve, feeling the subtle resistance of the tight metallic threads. Below the lamp assembly lies the rotation carriage. This particular optic was designed to flash, sending a sweeping beam of light across the horizon to distinguish it from a steady coastal star. To achieve this rotation, the entire multi-tone assembly of brass and glass rests upon a circular track of polished steel. Trapped between the optic base and the steel track are 12 heavy bronze chariot rollers. These wheels are perfectly spherical and coated in a thin layer of protective grease. The rotation is driven by a grand clockwork mechanism housed beneath the lantern room floor. We descend a short, cast-iron ladder to inspect the gearworks. In the center of the lower room stands a tall, rectangular cabinet made of polished mahogany. Inside this cabinet hangs a heavy lead weight, suspended by a thick steel cable. The lighthouse keeper would use a large hand crank to manually wind this weight all the way to the ceiling of the lantern room. It was a slow, exhausting, daily chore. As the weight slowly descends down the length of the tower, it pulls on the steel cable. This downward force turns a large toothed brass drum. The drum engages with a series of smaller, interconnecting gears. Each gear is cupped with perfect mathematical precision to step up the speed of the rotation. The sound of the escapement is rhythmic and entirely reliable. It dictates the exact speed at which the heavy lens assembly revolves on the floor above. A long, vertical drive shaft transfers this regulated energy up through the ceiling, connecting to a pinion gear that meshes with a large ring gear on the optic base. We apply a small amount of fine machine oil to the teeth of the pinion gear. The oil spreads slowly across the brass, ensuring the friction remains absolute and smooth. The clockwork mechanism requires no electricity, no modern motors. It is powered solely by gravity, guided by the ingenuity of 18th century horology. We ascend the iron ladder back into the lantern room. We take a clean, soft cloth made of unbleached linen. We begin to polish the brass muntins, removing the invisible layers of salt and grime. We carefully lift the first heavy glass prism back into its designated slot. It settles into the brass framework with a soft, definitive click. The brass retaining clip is repositioned. We take the small screwdriver and slowly, deliberately, tighten the delicate brass screws until they are perfectly flush. Piece by piece, the enormous puzzle of glass is reassembled. The dioptric center, the upper catadioptric rings, the lower refracting prisms. With each addition, the optic becomes heavier, more complex, and more mathematically profound. It stands once again as a monument to precision. The heavy outer brass panels are lifted back into place. We align the 12 primary retention bolts with their iron threads. The leather-wrapped iron spanner is employed once more. The bolts are tightened until the housing is entirely secure. We imagine the lighthouse keeper stepping up to the argand lamp. He trims the circular cotton wick to a perfectly even height. He opens the brass valve, allowing the whale oil to flow down the copper tube and saturate the wick. He strikes a match. The flame catches, instantly burning bright and white. He places a tall, cylindrical glass chimney over the flame to establish the powerful double draft. The light from the lamp radiates outward in a chaotic sphere, but the moment it strikes the perfectly ground surfaces of the glass prisms, the chaos is tamed. The jagged, multi-directional rays of light are bent, redirected, and forced into absolute alignment. They emerge from the outer face of the lens as a single piercing beam. The clockwork is engaged. The heavy multi-ton apparatus begins to turn on its greased bronze rollers. It revolves in utter silence. The concentrated beam of light sweeps out of the lantern room, piercing through the dense coastal fog. It reaches miles out into the dark, turbulent ocean. It is a silent protector, a rhythmic pulse of safety, constructed from nothing more than brass, glass, oil, and gravity. We sit quietly on a small wooden bench in the corner of the room. We watch the steady rotation of the great lens, the slow, mechanical turning of the brass, the gentle, rhythmic ticking of the escapement below, the faint, warm smell of the oil. The light continues its silent rotation. The gears continue their slow descent. It is time to rest. Good night. Discover more history by watching the next video. We're eager to share more with you. You can't go wrong. All our videos are deeply detailed, dull while fascinating, and distinctly sleep-inducing.